So I guess we should start. So good evening, everyone. I'm Rohan Zaveri, Treasurer of the International Law and Policy Society, National Law University, Odisha, and I would be co-moderating this webinar being conducted by our society. The topic for which is Playing Robin Hood, TWAILing Vaccine Distribution. It is my great pleasure to introduce our guest speaker for today, Dr. Thamil Venthan Ananthavinayagan, who is currently a teaching associate in international human rights law at the University of Nottingham, situated in the United Kingdom. Prior to this, Dr. Thamil has also been a lecturer at the Griffith College Dublin and at the National University of Ireland, Galway. Dr. Thamil has also presented papers and has given guest lectures at think tanks, international organizations, and universities around the world. So, before handing over to Sir, I just want to request everyone to just send their messages in the inbox and not to turn on your mics unless asked to do so. So, over to you, Sir.
Rohan, thank you so much for this very kind introduction, and also my sincere thanks to Richik and Jeevan, my research assistant, for inviting me to talk. It's a great pleasure and a great honor, and I hope in the not too distant future we will meet each other in person, hopefully. So, having said that, I mean, Rohan kindly introduced me to you, so this is my great pleasure to be here and an honor to speak to you all who had decided to join on a Monday afternoon and to be exposed to my ugly voice and face. But it's my great pleasure. So the title, as you've seen yourself, is Playing Robin Hood, TWAILing Vaccine Distribution. The original title was a bit different because this is an article that I have submitted to the European Yearbook on Human Rights. So it's a bit different, the actual title that I had, but my research assistant, Jeevan, he decided to go completely Rambo and change the title of the article, or for this presentation at least. And I thought to myself, in retrospect, actually it makes sense, because I am now at the University of Nottingham, right? So I am the city of Robin Hood. You can refer to me as the Brown Robin Hood in the future. This is my great pleasure to this very end to talk to you. And also, yeah, it is also a very timely topic, personally, on a very personal level, I must say. I am currently in Bonn, my hometown. I was born and raised in Germany. For those who wanted a bit more elaboration about myself, I was born and raised in Germany. My parents are originally from Sri Lanka. They are Tamils, as you can tell by my own name. I am a Tamil myself. I belong to the Tamil ethnicity from the island of Sri Lanka, but I was born and raised in Germany. So I came to Bonn just only yesterday evening from the Republic of Ireland, before I have to head over to Nottingham in the next few days or so. Simply because my mom, my amma, and my uncle were vaccinated today. So I booked an appointment, and it was my great, with great gratitude. 1 year into this pandemic, I wanted them to be vaccinated as soon as possible. But I also understand, while they were vaccinated today, and I was driving them around, I realized that this is a privilege that we have, and only 1 in 10 people of the global south will have the same privilege. I'm a TWAIler. Many know what TWAIL means. If not, I will explain it to you. So I was told that I have 1 hour to talk. So I will also strictly adhere to the time. It's 1:40 now here in Bonn, Germany. So I will talk for about 1 hour up to 2:40 my time, or 2:35 rather of my time, because I've been speaking for 5 minutes already. and I will display to you a presentation. And after that, I understand we have a half an hour Q&A. And I'm very happy to take any questions. So please don't feel intimidated whatsoever. From Indian students, from my fellow brown people, I always understood that they're kind of eager and keen to ask questions. So I'm very happy and looking forward that you assassinate me with intellectually challenging questions. So I hope this makes sense. I will talk for now less than an hour, 55 minutes until 2:35 my time, and then open it up for Q&A that you might have for me. And don't be intimidated. Again, I'd like to stress that. I mean, if you would know me in person, you would be fully aware that I'm one of those lecturers and professors who doesn't like to listen to his own voice. Rather than that, I am extending the floor to my students, and they should take over the stage because you are the owners of the course content, right? So enough from me now. Just one quick technical one, Rohan and Richik. I don't see that I can share the screen. So if it's possible, can you share your screen? Because I don't see that the possibility is opening up for me. So
just
if
ask
there,
my host to give you that option if it's possible.
well, otherwise you can share your screen and I will tell you to move on from one slide to the other, if that makes sense. If that would be okay for you. I'm just seeing
I'm
if I.
completely new at this. I can just ask the host to do it. Just give me a minute, sir.
Yeah, no problem. I don't see that I can share the screen. It doesn't give me this option at this minute. So I was wondering if you can share your screen and I will just, walk you from one slide to the next. And I sent you the slide, right? So sorry, everybody. Slight delay. This is the pandemic. These are pandemic-related issues, so I cannot share the screen at this very minute for some reason. But we will start officially in 2 minutes or so. Hopefully, we will fix the problem. So, if I may also already, discuss with you what TWAIL means. Perhaps some of you know what TWAIL means. I belong to the scholarship called Third World Approaches International Law, abbreviated TWAIL. And what does TWAIL say? We believe that international law as it stands reproduces colonial hierarchies. And we believe that to this very end, the new international organizations are reproducing colonial hierarchies. They are keeping the weaker states, the formerly colonized states, at bay for their own benefit and to expand upon their hegemony. So TWAIL, school of thought is the wrong word, movement, which wants to dismantle this hegemonic approach. And that is why I have introduced all my articles, my TWAILing approach, to establish a completely different counter-hegemonic discussion. So, is there a chance to share from your screen and give it 1 minute, everybody?
I sent the link to my host, and he's saying he'll just do it.
Sorry? He will do it?
Yes, sir, he's trying.
Okay. Because I'm trying to open on my laptop at least, and I cannot open the possibility here. These are the horror moments, and I should already have like a preconceived text ready to either bridge the time, this awkward minutes, when we have to fix the technical problems. Ah, there we go. So I don't need my preconceived text. So thank God. So apologies to everybody. If you can enlarge the screen there, Richik or Rohan, below, you see on the right hand side. Yeah, but if you can go right on the right hand side there, do you see this? You can enlarge it there as well. Yes, exactly. Wonderful. Thank you so much. So, what is the research endeavor? If we can go to the first slide there, perhaps. Right, perfect. So, the research endeavor that we are pursuing here is how can the international community, represented by the World Health Organization, recast and adjust a human rights component to the vaccination program and enable a fair access and a share of the vaccine to tackle the global health crisis? And to be more precise, in my view, how can we utilize the enshrined right to health in a developing and post-colonial world in order to encounter the global political and legal hegemony of wealthy states? And as I said to you, I gave you already a number earlier. If it's Richik, if you can click on that cartoon perhaps quickly. I think that should enlarge it itself. Yes, perfect. Thank you. I gave you already a number earlier, namely that 1 out of 10 people in the global south will receive a vaccine. And interestingly, and this is something that I was truly astonished about, and we were talking about this when I was driving my uncle and my amma to the vaccination center here. I told them about another number, another figure, namely that 54% of the global vaccine are held by the global north. And the global north consists of 14% of the world's population. I saw another statistic, as a matter of fact, namely that the Canadian government can actually vaccinate its own population 8 times with the vaccines that they have at this very minute. I'm not sure what the plan of Justin Trudeau is in Ottawa, if he actually wants to vaccinate his people 8 times all over again. But these are quite appalling numbers, I have to state. So if we can zoom out quickly, Kuchik, and then go to yeah, exactly. If we can go to the overview of the issue, thank you. So before we click on the video, and I hope that video can be displayed, I had an issue there as well at another lecture last week or 2 weeks ago. But let me introduce you to the structure that I want to pursue now for the next less than an hour now. Number one, how has the post-colonial gap manifested itself as a form of colonial destruction of the health infrastructures? Number two, what are the legalized solutions under the WHO to administer a tax under the current legal framework? Number three, how can a legal administration of such a tax in favor of the global south be sustained through global south solidarity, where the pandemic is wreaking a havoc on the communities of all over the world? And finally, what are the ways and the visions for the future? And how can we become resilient enough to encounter and overcome the next pandemic, which will come eventually? So if we can perhaps play the video, Richik. I hope everybody can see and watch it as well. Yeah, we have to do something about the sound. Sorry, boss. I knew that this is going to happen. Is there something you can do about the sound by any chance, Richik?
I don't think so, sir.
Okay, don't worry. So perhaps zoom out of the video then. Don't worry. Let us move on to the next slide. So I thought of including some videos while I'm talking along. So don't worry. It's just in a 2 minutes video. I mean, let me quickly summarize the video. I mean, the video here amplifies the inequalities that exist between the global south and the global north. And especially it became evident through the vaccination program. Okay, so to this very end, and you've heard that quite often, the pandemic has not created inequalities. It has simply laid bare the simple fact that we live at a time of great inequalities. We became aware that the world that we live in right now is just only magnifying the existing inequalities, and the issues, the disparities will just become worse over the next weeks, months, and years. So if we can move on to the next slide, Richik or Rohan. Yeah, to the next one, another click. Yeah, click once more. Yes, perfect. So if you can go back again, sorry that I'm instructing you like this. If you can just quickly click on the cartoon for me for 1 second. So you see here, this is a cartoon from South Africa. And I found this cartoon quite telling because South Africa is a post-colonial country. And as a matter of fact, the reverberating consequences of colonialism, settler colonialism, are still evident. And it's not only that, elitism that is so pronounced and so widespread in the global south is causing much more problems to the lower bottom of our communities of the world. So it's not only poverty that you see, it's apartheid geography, inequalities, apartheid style lockdown, unemployment, hunger that is affecting the people. Interestingly, about more or less a year ago, before the pandemic hit, I was in India. I was at the South Asian University to present a paper, to give a presentation there. And this was in February of last year. So very shortly before the pandemic actually spread all over the world. And I felt already something's going to happen while I was in India. And then I flew to Kathmandu to give a lecture in Nepal, a guest lecture. And while I was in Kathmandu, things quickly escalated. And I knew that it's better to take the first flight back home. So I came back home, although I had to give another lecture in Chennai, in Tamil Nadu. So I came back home to Dublin, or first to London and then to Dublin, and I just saw from the distance, really, just like perhaps this cartoon figure here, that some big stones are coming along my way, or of all our ways, okay? But while I was in India, I saw already the great and deplorable inequalities that exist in this beautiful country. Many of those issues are related to colonialism, but they are also related to elitism that is prevalent and rampaging in post-colonial India. Many issues are also related to cultural practices and social practices, such as the caste system. People who are already at the very bottom of the societies have to suffer even more, and that is only magnified and amplified through the pandemic. And this cartoon is, I think, speaking to many situations of the countries of the global south, be it Brazil, be it South Africa, be it India, or be it anywhere else. And this is not only an issue, everybody, that is confined to people from the global south. In German, the Germans say auf einem hohen Ross sitzen. Auf einem hohen Ross sitzen means to sit on a high horse. Okay, meaning you're a bit arrogant or to talk down at somebody, but being somebody who has global south roots and who feels very much affiliated still with the global south and who still fights for the cause of the global south, because international law, international politics should be done for, by, and of the global south and its peoples. I strongly believe that these issues are not only confined there, because these are issues that we are facing and seeing also in the global north, who's predominantly impacted by the pandemic. Well, it's predominantly the BAME community. What does BAME stand for? The Black, Asian minority and other Black, Asian and other minority ethnic groups. That's BAME, B-A-M-E, what it stands for. And we have seen that those people from those communities who are non-white were to a large detriment affected by the pandemic, either in terms of income, but most predominantly because of health. They were working at the front lines. They were working in the hospitals. They were working in essential retail and workers' environments. And they took the major hit, right? And as I told you at the very beginning, I was at this vaccination center and I looked around. I looked around this, vaccination center of the World Conference Center in Bonn. You can check it yourself. Bonn is the home to the United Nations Climate Secretariat. So we have all these United Nations organizations. And the World Conference Center is situated in that quarter of the city, which was once the former governmental headquarters, because Bonn, my hometown, was the former capital of Germany. So they created this and built this World Conference Center just recently, which is just in front of the United Nations. And they're using it currently for the vaccination strategy of Germany. And I looked around the room, okay? And there were hundreds of people, obviously social distancing. But while I was looking at this vaccination unfolding, I had to somewhat construct my thoughts for today's and just, for this lecture now. I looked around and I just saw white people. I saw white Germans. And I think, my mother, my uncle, and I wasn't vaccinated. It was only them because they were in a vulnerable group. They were the only non-white Germans in the room. So this, opens some other questions. Is there some vaccination skepticism? Okay. But there is also probably another reason why those people were not there in the room, because that slot to vaccinate the people was opened online, and some people didn't have the access to Wi-Fi or didn't have the technical know-how how to book a slot and then vaccinate themselves. So we have to realize that there are social privileges, access to technology, access to wealth, access to knowledge that is not properly distributed among peoples in the global north, but as well as in the global south. Okay, so I have 35 minutes left, I see. So let's move on to, if we can zoom out quickly, Richik, and yeah. And then if you can just click on this growing inequalities, and that will, no, sorry, if you can go back, sorry about this. If you can just, on that upper slide, if you can, yes, just only make it bigger. So exactly, yeah, that's fine. So what are we then talking about? Are we standing at the beginning of a syndemic? And you might ask now, what is a syndemic? Well, syndemics concern with policies of greater political economic forces. And they are resulting in legacies of inequalities and inequities in social, political, economic, and power relations. Inequities through syndemics also impact on the distribution of health. Third, it forces us to think about syndemics in ways how biological processes and social, economic, and power inequities are shaping health distribution in the long term. And let me read out to you a comment by a scholar. The scholar says, orientated towards a vanishingly general utility that cannot be caught up with it, this mode of humanization or Western solipsism excludes coexistence in the lived present upon which reciprocity could be built. This temporal non-relationality is a disjuncture of worlds and pandemics. So it's what I'm trying to explain through the terminology syndemics is syndemic is creating societal structures of pandemic. There are societal structures that are impacted, infiltrated, and completely constricted by the pandemic, with an impact on social, civil and political, and moreover, and this is more importantly, perhaps, economic power relations in the global north and the global south. But the global north, because it has already the upper edge due to its financially better situation, is going to immunize the Western world from any further social deprivations. And obviously those top percent will benefit from the better distribution and access to health. Richik, can we move on to the next slide, perhaps? I think the next slide below is this video, so we can skip that video because we cannot hear it anyway. So, yeah, so since it's not working, let's move on to the next slide. Yes, so if you can quickly make this global health standards, that slide a bit bigger for me, please. Yes. If you can just, yeah, perfect. That's perfect. Thanks. So what is colonialism? Colonialism has its reverberating echoes of the past. And why is, why are we obsessed with colonialism, you might ask? The most of the hard-hitting questions that I got on TWAIL and counter-hegemonic approaches to international law, whenever I gave a presentation, it was not so much the global north where I gave lectures or presentations and I got one hard-hitting question after the other. It was rather the global south that had asked me always very hard-hitting questions. I remember I was in Singapore once, if you can consider Singapore global south, in India, and so on and so forth. South Korea, if you can also count South Korea as a global south country, where I got very critical and hard-hitting questions and I didn't know where left and right was. But we are not obsessed with colonialism. We are trying to historically, politically, socially uncover the roots of the current social malaise. Chris Maniapra, who is currently a professor at, I think, Tufts University in the US, wrote a great book, which is called Colonialism in a Global Perspective. Published it last year. So if you're interested, please get that book. It's not too expensive. It's about $20, I think. By Western standards, it's definitely not expensive, and you know how expensive academic books can get. So Chris Maniapra, he writes the following sentence. He says, colonialism produced new dimensions of bodily space within which to exercise colonial command and to police, divide, contain, and cleanse. Colonialism has impacted who has access to this upper greatest privilege within the society. The person who holds health, the access to health, is the one who holds the biopower. Biopower in the sense of the often invoked Michel Foucault had mentioned. Michel Foucault, the great French philosopher, wrote in The History of Sexuality and in many other of his contributions that are forming the basis of a discussion until today and beyond, how the governor of a space, of a soil, is deciding who's going to live and who's going to die. And the right to health is the utmost tool to decide who is going to live. And speaking with the words of Chris Manjapra, how do we police, divide, contain, and cleanse life? Okay? So this brings me then to the further discussion on how this has translated into the contemporary forms of biopower that is structured via the right to health, namely the contemporary financial mechanisms that I had mentioned to you earlier. Namely, as we as TWAILers say, that international organizations are continuing with neocolonialism. They're continuing with imperialism. They still control, subjugate, subordinate the global south for their own world structure and their world philosophy and their world policies. And what am I thinking of? Well, I think of two predominant organizations. Unfortunately, I cannot show you the video, and I hope that Rowan and Richik can circulate the slide later on to you all who are in the room, and you can move from one slide to the other and click on the videos. This video is it's a no-brainer, but it's easy perhaps to understand what I'm going to talk about, namely the IMF, the International Monetary Fund, and the World Bank. These two organizations have sustained, supported, and nourished an international mechanism, an international world system that is favoring the global north. It became the greatest organizations for the furtherance of a neoliberal project. And what do I talk? And what do I mean when I say neoliberal project? Well, it's about less government, not more. To speak with the terms of Ronald Reagan. The hegemonic project of the neoliberal paradigm wants to privatize, it wants to marketize, it wants to commercialize, it wants to deregulate, expand the markets, and the social and economic needs of the people have to listen and to obey the morals of the market. The colonial legacies have impacted health infrastructures and have promoted and furthered health injustice. And I'm one particular program that has assisted in this radical privatization and marketization of the global health of the global south, namely the structural adjustment programs. What are structural adjustment programs? Well, the World Bank and the IMF gives loans to the global south to finance its massively overarching and abundant budget, and in return, the international organizations are requesting, not only requesting, they're requiring the global south states to structurally adjust their social programs to the policy agenda of the global north, spearheaded by the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank. Now, I see there are about 50 people in the room, and you might immediately say, well, Thamil, but isn't it that, you know, there is the chief economist at the IMF, Gopinath, I think Gayatri Gopinath is her name, who is of Indian descent, and isn't she representing the voice of the global South? Well, look, the great problem, and this was, you know, a subject of my topic that I gave to the Symbiosis Law School a couple of weeks ago, is the corruption of and manipulation of international law through the third world elite. The third world elite has already assisted, manipulated, and obscured justice for the sake of helping and furthering a neoliberal and Western agenda in the global South. And the structural adjustment programs have been highly beneficial for this very idea. Richie, can we show this one cartoon there before we move on to the next slide? On the right-hand side there. If you can click on that cartoon on the right-hand side here next to the slide. Yes, very good, thanks. So you see here on the left-hand side a gentleman, a white gentleman, showing a map depicting most likely South Africa, and showing how apartheid is well and alive and thrives in the country still. And on the right-hand side, you see a globe, the global apartheid, and you see three dominant players that are furthering the international organizations and international systems that are sustained and supported by the Western world, namely the IMF, the WTO, and the World Bank that I had mentioned to you earlier. Now, you will also say the WTO has now a new Secretary General, Iweala, from Nigeria, the former finance minister. But listen, it's the same thing with Gopinath. We are seeing third world elites that are switching to international organizations only to serve a master that is inflicting social injustice in the global South. So we are faced with global apartheid. Global apartheid in terms of socio-economic access. And the vaccination distribution now poses an important juncture in world history. If we can zoom out, Richik or Rohan, and then move on to the next slide, perhaps, please. I'm sorry I'm making your life miserable there at the very end. If we can just zoom out and then move on to the next slide. Yeah. Yes. So, can you perhaps, you know, make this cartoon a bit bigger? Yeah. Okay. Perfect. So, what we see here, another cartoon. I mean, since I cannot display any videos at this very minute, I try to bring my point across through showing you the cartoons. So, what you see here is COVID-19 is dominating all our lives, right? Before I flew to Germany, and I'm looking at the time right now, it's 20 minutes I still have left. So I think I'm good in time because I cut off on the video. So there is a good side to that as well. Before I came here to Germany from Ireland yesterday, not only yesterday, I think 1 week ago already, I had to plan how to get to Germany, to my own country. And I had to do a PCR test. I had to register my entry into the country. I had to do or book appointments for other corona tests that I have to do in order to be on the safe side, right? But you know, I printed out all the paperwork to have it at hand, and I needed an essential reason to leave Ireland as well. So I needed to print out the vaccination appointment of my mother. I had to show that to the Irish police. I had to show everything to the German border police when I arrived in Germany, and it was incredibly exhausting already. This travel that usually is done within 2 hours, and you can book this morning and you can fly the next evening, is not as easy as it was pre-pandemic. So many people on this cartoon and many people there who are watching this are thinking the same. you want the normal world back again, perhaps. And as many have asked already, the right question, was the normal that we had really normal? I don't think so. And as I said at the very beginning, the pandemic has only made us aware of the inequalities, and it has even expanded and magnified the inequalities that exist in the world. And now this is, to this very end, an important point in history for us to reject social inequalities, to reject hegemony, and to rectify and redistribute the privileges of the global north to the global south. If we can zoom out again, Richik, and if you can make the text a bit bigger on the left-hand side, perhaps for me. Yeah, if you can just, make it a bit bigger here on the left-hand side, the text there. Yeah, perfect. That's fine. That's fine. So Adam Hanna, he writes, since the mid-1980s, repeated bouts of structural adjustment that I just mentioned to you earlier, my own words, have accompanied by Western military action, debilitating sanctioned regimes or support for authoritarian rulers, have systematically destroyed the social and economic capacities of poorer states, leaving them ill-equipped to deal with major crises such as COVID-19. And what do you think I'm thinking of right now? Well, I'm thinking in particular of Chile. Think of the coup against the freely elected socialist president of Chile, Salvador Allende, and who was replaced by an authoritarian ruler, namely General Pinochet, who was at the will of the global north. And what did the global north then do? Spearheaded by Margaret Thatcher and Ronald Reagan, the leaders of the UK and the US, well, they inflicted upon Chile a social system that was favoring the rich and abandoning the poor. Until today, we see the consequences of marketization, commodification of public goods in Chile, because those public goods are not public anymore, they are privileges for the powerful few. So how can we redistribute? How can we fight back this particular ideology? And how can we serve in the interest of the people that are in urgent need of the vaccination? Whatever it is, Moderna, AstraZeneca, Pfizer, or all those other vaccinations in the room. Well, we know that China has developed vaccines. We know that Russia has developed some. Even India has developed some with the Maitri program of the current government. But is it truly about compassion to distribute those vaccines in addition to the Western-based vaccines? Or is it about creating new dependencies and new colonialism? Is it really about the right to health, or just only a bridge to create and use the right to health for power dimensions? So let's move on to the next slide, Richik. I have about 15 minutes left, so I'm critically aware of that. Just, yeah, to the next one. Yeah. Next one. Yes, solution. So if we can expand, if we can go back, sorry, if we can go back, go to the other slide up there, perhaps. Yes, and that, make it a bit bigger there. Yes. So the idea is to talk about the right to health. The right to health is enshrined in Article 12 of the ICESCR, the International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights. For me, it's an important launch pad for everything that has to come. But it has to be seen in a context of Article 25 of the UDH, the Universal Declaration. It has to be seen in conjunction with Article 4 of the Convention on the Rights of the Child, in conjunction with Article 5 on the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, Article 12 and 14 of all forms of elimination and discrimination against women, and also Article 5 of elimination of all forms of racial discrimination. So all of these major human rights treaties are assisting Article 12 in enunciating, highlighting, underscoring, and amplifying the right to health is not only compelled to the morals of the market. No, it is not a privilege. No, it is the component for creating health justice for people that are there to live in a free and equal world. So, as it is said at another juncture, and let me read out this one quote, along with the production of disposable existence for the capitalist liberal goals and underpinning necropolitics, those examples reveal also another subtler aspect of biopolitics that I mentioned to you earlier by Michel Foucault. The latter doesn't only refer to a novel form of power that takes life population as the main target of political interventions. It is also a power that is all the more pervasive because its techniques of governance imitate the very mechanisms of life. Indeed, both the security and the normalization procedures quoted above rely on the understanding and regulation of the internal forces of events and operate therefore as if they were vital, following Mario Muller's observations. Consequently, biopolitics is therefore, and first, a mode of power that aims at governing populations, and second, mimics life's intrinsic mechanisms in order to reach this objective. So the morals of the market, the neoliberal regime creates mechanisms that is governing, policing population's life. But it is the right to health that is creating the conditions for the survival of the people. It places again and entrenches the governance in the hands of the people rather than in the hands of the governor. Theo van Boven, the great human rights academic from the Netherlands, he was my own professor and mentor. He said, you cannot isolate the right to life from the right to health because they're interrelated, interconnected, and interdependent. We have to further Article 12 that I just mentioned to you and put it in context with Article 2 of the WHO's constitution. And that brings me to the idea that I'm putting forward, namely to administer a tax under the WHO regime. We have created the discussion on COVAX and creating a mechanism of equal access and sharing and distribution of the vaccines. But it is not as far and sophisticated and elaborated as I want it to be. It needs to be a rectifying tool. We need something that needs to be a rectifying tool in addition to COVAX. And the WHO tax or tax administered by the WHO, in my eyes, has to be seen in a content of normative content in conjunction between Article 12 of the International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights that are Article 2 of the WHO's constitution, but moreover, Article 57 of the UN Charter, which creates the specialized agency of the WHO. But it's also about something else that I would like to mention. Namely, if you look up the ICESCR, the International Covenant on Social and Cultural Rights, you will see Article 12.2 C and Article 15.1 B. And why are those particular rights then important to administer a tax? The international community must accept that the health injustice is one place of injustice and a threat anywhere. We need to read Article 12.2 C and Article 15.1 as a continuum, namely the necessity, the possibility, and the availability for the world population to adequate health access that needs to be obtained and sustained. And it's interesting that the committee on the ICESCR has also highlighted with its general comment 25 the equal access to the right to health in order to further it and to give it full development. If we can move on to the next slide, Rijik. I have 10 more minutes left, so I think I am good in on time. So if we can move to let's fix it, yes. So how can we fix it? And I had already mentioned to you, we have to see the aforementioned articles in a context. Article 12 of the ICECR, Article 12.2, Article 15.1 of the ICECR, Article 2 of the WHO's Constitution, and finally Article 57 of the UN Charter, that in my eyes would give the possibility in a fluid state of aggregation in a legal and normative interpretation to the WHO to administer such a text, that we can, and this is one idea that I would propose and that I've proposed also in my article, namely, if we vaccinate, like today, somebody here in the global north, and as a matter of fact, the people in the global north here, we didn't pay a cent. We didn't pay a cent when we went there. But you can give a donation of €5 or more that will be then collected after each and every vaccination shot and then put forward towards a fund that will create a monetary compensation to buy more vaccines to distribute to the global south. That is my idea, that in practical terms will just only realize what I have just said to you in the legal theory. I hope that made sense. I've been talking and talking. It's always difficult not to see anybody in the virtual world. But I hope when we have a discussion in a couple of minutes, you're going to, as I said, intellectually assassinate me. And I'm very happy to be intellectually assassinated and tested for my most thoughts that I have. The pandemic, let me quote here another scholar. The pandemic has raised questions about a range of other rights, such as the right to health, education, income, freedom from hunger. Indeed, some of the actions and inactions of states may well have contributed to disproportionate levels of deaths and severe illness among some sections of society. With the Russian states to protect their own interests, their establishments, and that of their own citizens, concepts of human rights, which are supposed to be universal to all humans and provided globally, have often been lost. However, at the least, the continuing existence of the international bodies such as the WHO and the OHCHR provided some level of hope that in the world less afraid and recovering from the pandemic, concepts and actions will return. So if we move on to the last slide, perhaps, Richard. Yes, the conclusion now, I think. And with that, we can, yes. Yes, so if we can make this one bigger, yes, thanks. The rollout of the vaccination is demanding state obligations. We need to create right to health throughout the process, and the legal norms are there to create insurability, affordability, accessibility, and moreover, the redistribution of health towards the global south in all resource allocations and realize the right to health. We need proper access to right to health. This is the important and crucial and instrumental moment at this juncture of world history. Global action is needed. A pandemic doesn't happen in one place and not in another one, okay? We are interconnected, we are interrelated. At the end of the day, the safety in one place affects the safety of another place. We can only be safe and healthy if we can ensure the safety and health of everybody. The pandemic has highlighted and amplified that the world community has to stand together. National responses and this vaccine nationalism that is often postulated by the global north, and the vaccine imperialism that we see from powerful actors in the global south, are not going to contribute to a coherent, comprehensive health framework. We are actually entrenching global health injustice and paving the way for mortality and morbidity. Health justice is about solidarity. Obiara Okafor, who is the current independent expert of the United Nations on solidarity, has made us critically aware on a couple of occasions, especially against the background of the pandemic, that we need effective preparedness and the ability to anticipate and detect and coordinate responses in a collective capability. Because that is health justice, everybody. Richard, can we just enlarge this one cartoon on the right-hand side of the text? And I think I like this one cartoon that I saw on the internet that really makes it very clear. If you can just make this bigger, perhaps? Can everybody see it? Richard? Can you just show the cartoon on the right-hand side, perhaps there? Yeah, this one there. Yes. So I think, I mean, it's just only highlighting what I said. I like the cartoon. It's a simple cartoon, but it shows solidarity, and you see people of different colors, scientists who are trying to fight the virus that has wreaked havoc upon the world community. And it's only in constant interaction that we see between global north and global south. Getting rid of the idea of nationalism, getting rid of the idea of imperialism, that we can encounter this pandemic. There is no other way. We cannot vaccinate one people. We've seen the US and the UK and Israel are well ahead with their vaccination, whereas countries in Africa will have vaccinated their population perhaps in 2024. It's another statistic that I read at some stage when I was writing my article. And this is not only deplorable, this is outrageous. If we can move on to the next slide, Richik, and then I will end my torture. I think I'm doing you great injustice there, forcing you to do what I want. So some final thoughts here. In the aftermath of the pandemic, we need affordable schemes to be in place to build inroads for the most vulnerable people of both the global north, the BAME community, perhaps, and also the global south. We need to face unemployment, mass hunger, homelessness, and mass poverty. Human rights should be rectifying, liberating. It's not only about this whole, and I've heard this too often, and I come from, the human rights background before I actually indulged in a larger scale of investigation of public international law. But my academic bread was human rights, and I was at some point disillusioned and frustrated by the constant invocation of civil and political rights for the Western world. Freedom of expression, freedom of process, okay, fine, granted. We need negative freedom from the state, it's always said by the global north. It's also fine, I accept it. But we need positive obligations by the states to ensure right to health, to ensure that people have right to education, that people have a right to housing, that people are free from hunger. And all these rights are connected with each other. And the pandemic has exposed that people who were not able to go to work anymore because of a global health crisis could not provide for their families, for their education, for their housing anymore. These are colonial structures that are existing in the contemporary world, sustained and supported by international organizations. The proposed vaccination tax should disrupt and dispute structures of social inequalities and pave inroads where we can create local knowledges, traditions, and build on the subaltern wealth of narratives. And international human rights law can be a guidance in order to amplify what is needed, namely solidarity. Solidarity is about sharing knowledge, experiences, and resources in order to fight against a pandemic that is threatening all of us. So to this end, nobody is safe until everybody is safe. And injustice in one place is injustice everywhere. This is it for my side. I know that I have been talking for exactly an hour. So being a good German, at least on paper, I've delivered on time. Okay. So over to you, Richik and Rohan. Thanks very much, and sorry that we had this technical difficulties at this very beginning.
Thank you so much for this amazing presentation, sir. Now I'd like to move on to the question and answer session. So first of all, I just have like a couple of questions that I'd like to ask, if that's okay.
You are misusing the privileges of the chair. Right. Go ahead.
I'll ask a different question first, sir.
No, go ahead. It's great. It's great. Thanks, Rohan. Please.
Okay. So my question was with regard to the syndemic that you referred to between the presentation. So you said that the societal structures are impacted and have large-scale implications due to the pandemic, and that the whole situation majorly affects the economic, social power distribution and relations. And also told by you, the global north is going to strive to immunize the Western world, and it is certainly the case that it is going to give priority to itself. And whereas India and other southern countries are playing a crucial role in manufacturing and supplying the vaccines. So why is that we, the global south, despite being at the forefront of producing vaccines, are still not able to control the distribution and regulation mechanisms with respect to the vaccine on a global level? If you could just elaborate on the different dynamics at play and what India can do to change the balance of powers here.
Yeah, it's a very good question. So, I mean, as I said to you earlier, given you know the scarcity of time, I mean, I couldn't elaborate on this concept of syndemic. I mean, Ursula von der Leyen, the current president of the Commission president of the European Union, she's a German. In brackets, unfortunately, Germans have too much power in Europe and elsewhere. And I say that with great antipathy. The syndemic that I referred to earlier concerns with greater political, economic forces that affect several generations to come. They usher in social, economic, and power inequities. And these are impacting upon the risk and resource for health and how the vaccine is then distributed. And COVID-19 has made this acutely aware for us. And you're right, Rohan, you're completely right. Global South countries play a critical role in the production of the vaccine. And it's not only this Maitri program of the current government. I mean, it's also all of these different companies from the Western world that are producing in the global South, and there is a lack of ownership at the end of the day because it's produced in the global South, and then it's like transferred to the global North and distributed among the global North, right? So, I mean, if I get the question, correctly right now, and I try to answer to it as poignantly and precisely as possible, how can we encounter that, right? How can we encounter this this accommodation and distribution of ownership? Well, and why is it that it is transferred from the global south to the global north? Well, as I said at some stage early in the presentation, it's very much about influence and geopolitics. Probably it's the first time I'm mentioning it, but now very clearly. It's about geopolitics. Vaccinations are about geopolitics. It's not about global health justice. It's not all about creating a background for supporting the global south. It is rather about neo-colonialism. It's about imperialism, and it's about geopolitics. And China and India are playing big roles in transferring their vaccines from their countries to other countries in the global south even. But then they are also distributing it to the global north because of geopolitical reasons. So at the end of the day, it's not about human rights. It's not about global health. It's about influence. And that has been always the echo of the past, if you wish. Geopolitics.
Thank you for the answer, sir. So the next question was it was on the problem of the damaged health infrastructure that you were referring to because of the pre-colonial era. So someone has asked that we have tried to rectify this damaged health infrastructure by adopting the SDGs. So is it a viable solution? Because some view the goal as very ambiguous, non-enforceable, and also state that we are already off track. For instance, the supply of vaccines through the COVAX program is already getting delayed, and the producing countries are practicing this newly coined term called the vaccine nationalism. Sorry.
Yeah.
So, what can be a viable solution for this problem, and how can we guarantee a right to health at a global level?
So, as I said earlier, right, the right to health exists. Okay, the right to health is not like wishy-washy, Teletubby kind of vision or dream. It exists. It's there. The right to health is there, and the Supreme Court of India has been quite judicially adventurous to interpret socioeconomic rights, for example, right? So as the German Constitutional Court as well, in order to develop socioeconomic rights through civil and political rights. I'm not a big fan. I mean, coming to this very good question, I'm not a big fan of SDG. I'm quite frank and open. I know that many academics and policymakers and students are, very much invested in theorizing the SDG. The SDG is a great way forward to emphasize a vision. But we have already the right to health that is at hand right now. We have a UN Special Rapporteur on the right to health under the United Nations Human Rights Council. So in order to address this question, it's a very complicated question, to be honest, but we need to make use of, as much as I have issues with the United Nations, I have big issues with the United Nations, but and I have in particular big issues with the United Nations Human Rights Council, but many UN Special Rapporteurs who are voted to become UN Special Rapporteurs are from the Global South. And there are many of them who are TWAILers. We have Balakrishnan Rajagopal, who is the UN Special Rapporteur on the right to housing, for example. As I mentioned earlier, the independent expert, who's, as a matter of fact, he is a UN Special Rapporteur. He's not only called like that. On global solidarity, we have Michael Fakiri, who is the UN Special Rapporteur on the right to food. And then we have the current UN Special Rapporteur on the right to health, who is not a TWAIler. She is actually a medical doctor herself. But still, there are people who are capable of forcing the global north to rethink what the right to health can be for the future. And they are coming from the Global South themselves. So colonialism, to this very end, has impacted not only at the time of governance, colonial governance, the distribution of health, but it has also impacted the access, narrowed the access to health to very few privileged, right? There are too many people who could be alive today in the Global South if they had had enough money, right? Colonialism and elitism has narrowed the access to the right to health that is existing. It is an existing architecture. We need to sustain it, nourish it, and force it to become bigger and stronger and resilient. And I hope I will answer this question. I don't want to be one of these brown professors who keeps on talking, okay? So I hope the United Nations Human Rights Council, through its UN Special Rapporteurs, can play a critical role in forcing the right to health and drilling it into the architectures of the domestic legislations, and also the national human rights institutions of each and every Global South country that can play a critical role as well. Sorry for overboarding now with my answer.
No, it's not an issue, sir. We are here till you are all right with us. It's a pleasure, sir. So I'll move to the next question. So the next question is, countries like Madagascar have resorted to black markets where the elite of the country get vaccinated through the smuggled vaccines from the north, which can be harmful and illegal. They prefer these black markets as they have this notion that alpha countries would send them B-grade vaccines to use. Third world countries like guinea pigs, till what extent do you think this notion is correct? This again leads to the elitism question, I guess.
Yeah, it's a very good question. I didn't know about what happened there in Madagascar. Interesting. I mean, that's, black market. I think, having access to black markets of A-class vaccines is the ultimate form of elitism, isn't it? That you can have access to, it is like as if the current COVID-19 vaccines are the new cocaine or heroin or something like that. It's quite interesting. So only recently, I also, to answer this question, I think in either Mexico or some Latin American country, some people from the upper class had painted their hair gray in order to pose themselves as elderly and vulnerable, and then to get the vaccine. Okay, and those people were from the elite as well. So that neatly fits into the question from Madagascar or on Madagascar. So the question then is how to encounter that. Well, we need to go and devise an international strategy that, and I see that the strategy is somewhat implemented in some form in the Global South and the Global North. Namely, we need to prioritize the most vulnerable populations, and we need to make it a binding obligation before we vaccinate. Okay, so the WHO, in my eyes, plays a very big role because the WHO and as administering global health should, before allocating resources and access to vaccines, require from the receiving country the written obligation that the vaccines will be distributed to the most vulnerable, the people who are suffering the most, not giving it to the rich and wealthy. And those black markets need to be rigorously criminalized, and this has to come within legislation and come within proper implementation of those legislation in the domestic structures. But this has to come on, by the WHO in a coerced, coordinated way as an international organizing and administering body.
So the next question, it would be a follow-up question. The circumstances are generally broadly the same. So I wanted to talk about Israel and the way Israel is, we all know it's way ahead in the vaccination. But to my knowledge, they are also obligated to provide the Palestinians with vaccines, and that they are hardly doing so. So is there any way to make them comply with the international legal obligations in this circumstance?
See, I told you, I mean, my fellow brown people are very good with questions. It's a very good question there again. I mean, this has been covered by media and I think legal academics as well, that the Palestinians are suffering from, a lack of access. The Israelis have vaccinated their people before extending it to the Palestinian people. And there is, I mean, the fourth Geneva Convention, okay? Palestine is still occupied, ladies and gentlemen, okay? And we know far too well, and I'm speaking again as a German, I feel a special obligation towards Israel and the Jewish population, but I feel even a greater obligation as a human being, but as a Tamil who has been, his people have been oppressed by another people, and I see an equaling and similar history when I look at the Palestinians. Israelis are receiving the vaccine on a first come basis, whereas the Palestinians don't. Palestinians or Arab Israelis who have the Israeli citizenship, as a matter of fact, I know, for example, one of my former colleagues, she's an Arab Israeli. She's a Palestinian, holds the Israeli citizenship, and her parents got vaccinated, as a matter of fact, because they were over 60 and fell within a vulnerable group. So I must admit that, okay? So we need to show the entire picture. However, Palestinians who are not Israeli citizens and who fall under the occupied territory have the access to right to health through the Fourth Geneva Convention and the additional protocols, ladies and gentlemen. It's something that is so evident and has been often invoked also prior to the pandemic, that Israel is under specific international obligations under the Fourth Geneva Convention. And also, Israel has signed the ICESCR, the International Covenant on Socioeconomic Rights, and because it's still occupying Palestine, it has an extraterritorial reach to the Palestinian regions. So they are under direct state obligation to provide for Article 2, right to health to the Palestinians, as a matter of urgency. So I understand this is a very interesting question, but you know yourself, speaking of Israel and international law, international human rights violations, is like speaking about dosa and chutney. They belong together. Okay, it's just easy like that. Okay, Israel and human rights violations are, they're like twins. They need each other. So I'm afraid it's only international pressure that will force Israel to extend the vaccination towards the Palestinians, or it has to be UNRWA that has to look after this on behalf of the WHO, perhaps. UNRWA, by the way, is the Palestinian Refugee Agency of the United Nations.
So the next question is, the WHO plays an important role in regulating the vaccines, but how credible is the WHO when we take into account the false notifications they issued during the beginning of the pandemic with regard to the Chinese operations and the statements made subsequently to it?
Yeah, it's a very good question again. So I think at the very beginning of the pandemic, I attended a talk. Like, I was not a panelist. I just attended the talk. So I'm not that big, if I can put it that way. I'm trying to be hopefully important and influential at some stage. So I'm just sharing with you my modest views every single time that I do. So I attended a talk which was organized by the National University of Singapore, And the great Professor Anthony Angie, one of the great thinkers of the TWAIL movement, attended as well, and the discussion was surrounding WHO's response in face of global health emergency, the wrong communication that was published based upon incoherent and incomplete messages and news from China. To be frank and to be clear, I think the WHO did mistakes. Okay, no question about it. But we are in the midst of a pandemic, and mistakes are inevitable. And China didn't, share with the world sufficient information and early information as possible upon the extent. We knew, I think, in November 2019, well, there is something. Okay, somebody ate a bat in Wuhan, and that is going to impact the world. And we knew that something is going to happen, but we didn't know the extent of it. And to answer this question again, it's a difficult one. And I think it's going to trigger some considerable litigation, perhaps, on the international level against China, but also the WHO. But at the end of the day, mistakes are inevitable in the time of a global pandemic to organize the global health regulations emergency of 7 billion people. So I understand the frustration towards the WHO. I understand it. I totally understand it. But we also have to understand that in the midst of a pandemic, it's inevitable that mistakes will be done.
So the next question is regarding vaccine passports and the right to life and the subsequent freedoms that are affected by it. So some countries have implemented a passport or green pass system in order to visit people, in order to enable people to visit certain public areas and private businesses, which is only given to those who are vaccinated. It is speculated that such a move may curtail the freedom of the individual, especially those who could not be vaccinated for reasons beyond their control. So what are your views about it?
Perhaps I can answer to this question with and link it with some of the questions from Sveda from Tamil Nadu, Vanakkam, to a fellow Tamilan or Tamilakji. Just recently, the Court for Human Rights, the European Court for Human Rights. I'm not very sure if you follow also European human rights jurisprudence, but just only recently, because I'm teaching European Convention on Human Rights currently at Nottingham, I just came across this judgment, and it was quite interesting. It was a judgment that dealt with compulsory vaccination schemes in Croatia. And the question was put forward to the European Court for Human Rights in Strasbourg in France, if compulsory vaccination is lawful and in accordance with international human rights law. And I haven't read the judgment yet, I must admit, because I was traveling, as I told you. But the European Court for Human Rights said compulsory vaccinations are legitimate tool to ensure global health. So flowing from that, I understand that many people are opposing this idea of vaccine passports. The current governor of Florida, DeSantis. I mean, he's. I'm not going into his political ideology here too much. Okay, I don't want to burn bridges for now. But he apparently opposed and signed a law that vaccine passports should be outlawed. My personal view on passports, I mean, my mom and my uncle, they got a stamp in their vaccination pass that they usually have. There is a vaccination passport that you always get for, for every vaccine that you get, right? I do think that considering the fact that COVID-19 apparently, and there are already some scientists who are saying that COVID-19 could become a regular phenomenon alongside the seasonal flu and mutate. I believe that if that is the case, then we have to truly consider a vaccine passport in order to ensure global health, travel, and walking from A to B. I mean, if you drive a car, you want to be sure that that person can drive a car, right? If a person got the driver's license in Australia, you want to make sure that this person can use that driver's license, say in Peru, in South America. So there needs to be some kind of a universally accommodated and agreed upon regulation that would allow for travel and that would ensure for global health, considering the developments in the future.
So if you got time, we'll just take one more question or two more questions.
Sure.
So why is that minorities in a nation, whether it be a developed nation like UK, US, or a developing nation like India, the minorities are mostly blamed for the spread of the pandemic. So why is it so? And is there any solution to it?
Why? Sorry, can you rephrase the question for me quickly, Rohan? Sorry, I didn't catch the last part.
Sir, it's just the question, the essence is that minorities, generally, it is the case that minorities are blamed for the spread of the pandemic. So is there any solution to bringing more equity on the blame game as well?
Yeah. It's a good question. I mean, this relates to the Asian hate crimes, in the US and UK and elsewhere, isn't it? I mean, I was actually thinking about it yesterday. Yesterday, I landed in Frankfurt. And when I landed in Frankfurt, I walked up and I saw a lot of Chinese people, waiting for their flights. And I could tell it's Chinese because you can understand Mandarin at some point, by ear at least, right? So I was like, okay. And then I looked obviously at the board and it said this flight is going to XYZ. So I immediately had to think about Asian hate crimes in the US, just only by looking at the Chinese people. And I'm also aware of the incidents that had happened in Ireland and in the UK as well, where people of Asian descent, of Southeast Asian descent, were attacked, regardless of being Chinese or Korean or Vietnamese or Thai or whatever. They were attacked. And our global leaders have also assisted and instigated a racialized climate. Okay, Donald Trump referred to the COVID-19 as the Kung flu. Remember, he referred to it as a Kung flu, which was very discriminatory, obviously, right? And I mean, also many other far-right leaders use the same xenophobic, racialized rhetoric to marginalize a group, to blame, to scapegoat one group. And this is the playbook of racialized capitalism. Okay, racialized capitalism. Capitalism depends on inequalities. Racism only enshrines it. Okay, and COVID-19 has just only made us aware of this very situation. That racism is only enshrining this racial, this social inequality. So people who are already struggling, white people, white work-class people from the US, the UK, France, Italy, wherever in the global north, who are already facing issues of lack of housing, lack of access to employment, etc., access to right to health even, are now instigated and distracted by their leaders to focus on an allegedly tiny group that is responsible for their woes, right? So how do we overcome that? Also here, Tendai Achumi, who is the current UN Special Rapporteur on racism, had issued, and I would invite everybody here in the virtual room to check Michael Fakiri, UN Special Rapporteur on the right to food, Obiar Okafor, who is the UN independent expert on solidarity, but also Tendai Achumi, who is the UN Special Rapporteur on racism. What kind of solutions they suggest? Well, we need anti-hate legislation. We need legislations in place in those domestic countries that ban and penalize racialized rhetoric and hate crimes as such. We need it. There's no other way. And we need to invest in a de-racialized environment. We need racial education, and we need to introduce this at the school level, at the university level, and that it has to be, walking through the intellectual thread of the people who are in a society. And this has to be promoted by the governments and by national institutions that are entrusted to fight racialized crimes, but also racialized rhetoric.
So, last question, sir. On a global scale, a sovereign country may defend their actions by saying that they prioritizing self-protection and security in a time of crisis is pretty reasonable argument to justify itself for keeping stock of the vaccines or making arrangements for it. Because ultimately, it is the one, or they are the ones, which are bearing all those manufacturing and supply chain costs that come with conducting an efficient vaccination program. So how do we pragmatically convince the countries to uphold equity in such a circumstance?
Well, these are like 5 questions in one, I think. That's a very good question. Well, look.
A short answer would suffice, sir, as we are very much out of time. So.
No, don't worry. I try to give like a quick answer to that, and the person can contact me later on via email as well if he or she wants. I can share with you my my Twitter handle here for later. So this is for Twitter. I think it's Dr. T is my Twitter handle. And then I think you can find me on LinkedIn under my full name. So just follow me on Twitter or LinkedIn.
You send all the links, sir. All the links to your social media. We'll send it personally with the follow-up mail.
Yeah. I mean, this is so. I try to be comprehensive now. So how can we achieve social equity? I mean, if that is like the question in a nutshell, facing this vaccine nationalisms and facing protective discourse about global health that is very much related to and confined to particular areas and regions, I would say the ultimate goal and the way forward is to build into universal access to healthcare that has to be established on a regional basis. So in Europe, we have, the European health insurance card. And I think it is built out of this common effort of the European Union to create like a coherent health infrastructure. And the countries of the world, whichever region they are, have to build a universal access to healthcare that will ensure social equity. And we need to tax the rich, which hold the great privileges and are narrowing the access to right to health, which should not be a privilege. It is a right. So in order to achieve the right to health, we need to tax people who have been benefiting for far too long from people whose work has contributed to the wealth of those. That is my frank view, and I think that is, a universal healthcare access on a regional basis can perhaps be a first stepping stone for social equity, if it makes sense.
It does, sir. So thank you so much, sir. So I feel honored and privileged to get the opportunity to propose a vote of thanks on this special day on behalf of International Law and Policy Society and our university. And on my own behalf, I convey my regards and hearty thanks to our chief guest. I also like to thank all the attendees who blessed us with their presence. We are grateful to the university administration, our Honorable Vice Chancellor, sir, and the IT department for helping us organize this event. Last but not the least, I would like to also thank the organizing team of our society who put their last week in arranging this webinar. And so I would personally like to say, and I've got a lot of comments here that are saying that this was the most informative webinar that has been that they have attended in.
Well,
thank you very much for that, sir.
I'm really, look, I'm no Anthony Angie. I'm not Tendai Achumi. I'm no Professor Chimney or something. I hope that I will be one day like them. But it was my great privilege when Jeevan reached out to me, and then you guys wrote me the email. So it was my great privilege to join and talk to you about my modest research and my modest proposals, and that you took your time for more than 1 or 2 hours to listen to me. So I'm truly privileged and humbled that you stayed with me for so long and listened. And what I would like to say to you is, especially there in India, and as I said earlier, I hope to meet you all in person soon enough. The future of the world, and I'm not too emphasizing too much pathos into this. I think you are the future of this world. Okay, you are going to carry this world in the future, and you should be aware that you always have to do the right thing. That is what my father always said to me. He was a former Tamil freedom hero for the Sri Lankan Tamils, and when he was in prison for 7 years under the government, he said to me, when I asked him, why did you do all of this? Why did you get rid of all the privileges of your life, coming from a distinguished family? He said, son, there are certain moments in life you have to do the right thing. And I think you as law students, you have to do the right thing. You have the tools, you have the spirit, and you have the hope. And whatever you do, go ahead with your dreams and visions, and you will create a better world, if I can say that.
Thanks very much for the kind words, sir. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Take care.
Thanks. Bye. And Richik, sorry about everything, okay?